Okay, so we're going to get started today, and we're taking kind of a step. We're going to be in Rhino all day today, but we're going to take a step back and start with some of the basics so I can talk you through how to learn to draw. If you've worked in AutoCAD before, this will be very easy. If you've taken 135 when we did AutoCAD, this will look very familiar to what I did in AutoCAD, but I think it's a really good way of kind of starting and understanding basic, how do I draw something? And so we're going to work just in 2 dimensions, nothing in 3D yet, but we will build on what you're doing today in future exercises. So we'll draw some today, and then we'll start to transition from what we drew flat into 3D and kind of work into the 3D world so you start getting familiar with commands. One of my big goals in doing this is to allow you to learn to basically draw. And since I'm assuming that we're starting with nothing, we have to start with the basics. And so that's kind of the purpose. You will catch on rather quickly, I suspect, which makes today rather easy, which is okay. But it will build and build and build, which is the whole point long term. So one quick reminder in that when I first plug in my flash drive, if I want Dropbox to be syncing, I do have to start the Dropbox AHK. So I'm going to go ahead. I just plugged in my flash drive. And I'm going to start it, and I have inside Portable Apps, I have the application, Dropbox Portable. I'm going to double click that to make sure it starts. In a second over here, I'll get the little Dropbox icon that shows that it's actually working and syncing. So I just want to try to remind you that every time you plug in your flash drive, you do have to make sure that happens. So that'll start working in the background, and I've gone ahead, there it is, right there. It's going to start connecting in just a second. And I've gone ahead and I've opened Rhino, which was just double-clicking on Rhino 5. And if that opens, if you're presented with a screen that lets you choose what template to use, you want to use large object inches. That's always the template you're going to use. If you don't, which my computer doesn't always do it, you just want to confirm that you are in fact in inches. And so right down here at the bottom of the screen, as we come across, it should say inches, right? And I know seeing the bottom of the screen is always impossible for people. At least for this row, you can never see it. But it should say inches. If it says millimeters, something's wrong. You can right-click on it and change your units. It goes to unit settings, and therefore you can change it. But for what we're doing today, we want it to be in inches. So once again, we kind of went through the overview of kind of the layout workspace and how we go through and draw things. Hold on one second. But what we're going to be doing today is drawing in flat 2-dimensional world. So we're going to work just in the top view, not in the perspective view. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the top to make it the active viewport, and then double click on the word top to make it take up the whole size of the screen. Okay? So as we look at this screen right now, we see that there is a kind of a grid structure in the background, and that there's a red axis and a green axis. And what this ultimately translates to is these types of programs, whether it's Rhino or whether it's AutoCAD, rely on a mathematical coordinate system to define lines and shapes. So, for example, if you had a line, it might have a coordinate for where the line starts and a coordinate for where it ends, right? You could also have, you guys remember back to like the Algebra 2 days when you had to like graph what certain curves and lines look like, right? You could have a start point and a slope to define it mathematically. That's exactly what Rhino does. It happens to do it in 3 dimensions, and it can do it with more than lines, but we're going to start with just lines today. And so if I'm looking at this, the point where the red axis and the green axis meet is 0.00 in space. So if you remember back to those days of graph paper, you had a 0, 0. Everything to the left and to the bottom is negative, and everything to the right and to the top is positive, right? So we have a set of coordinates that we can work with when we start to draw. And this can be very, very helpful when we're trying to draw complicated shapes. And so I'm going to start by teaching you this whole coordinate system, which translates to AutoCAD, by the way. And in reality, you're probably going to use a hybrid of a few times you use coordinates and a few times you use length and direction. And I'll show you both. So we're going to start with the Polyline tool. And unlike AutoCAD, kind of the default line tool that you're going to use in Rhino is a polyline, which means it can be a continuous line that starts at one point and goes through a variety of other points. In AutoCAD, the default is just a straight line segment, one point to the second point, and you have to actually pick it to be a polyline if you want it to be longer. So anyway, slight difference, but it's this tool right here. Looks like an angle with 3 little white dots on it. We're going to use that tool, which is the Polyline tool, to start our drawing. And so since I want it to start at point 00, right, I'm actually going to type 00. Now if I notice right now, we can kind of see that my cursor is jumping between these grid points, right? That's because grid snap is on, and we can see down here at the bottom of the screen it says grid snap. Because that grid snap is on, it's jumping from points. I tend not to rely on grid snap. Half the time I turn grid snap off so that I can put the cursor wherever I want it to be. If grid snap is off, you obviously have to rely on coordinates to get your measurements correct. So I'm going to turn it off for right now so that I know my coordinates, because that's what I'm kind of reinforcing right now. So what I'll do is I'll type the first point. So up here in my command line it says start a polyline. I'm going to specify that I want it to start at point 00, so I'll actually type 0 and then comma and then 0. And so you can see it show up here in my command line at 0, 0. When I hit enter on the keyboard, we can see that my line starts right there at 0, 0. Okay? Make sense so far? Okay. When I continue with this, recognize that what I'm drawing is on the back. That's where we're going with this, but we're starting with basics first. Okay. What I'm going to do is I want my next line to go straight up the y-axis, and I want it to be 24 feet long. So if I was using the coordinate system, right, and maybe the best thing to do is borrow a pen. Right, and this doesn't really involve too much math, right? But I have my x-axis and I have my y-axis going this way, right? I just started here at point 0, 0, right? I want to go up here so that this is 24 feet, right, going up this direction. Okay? So this point here, because it's on the x-axis it's 0, it would be point 0, right, 24 with a little apostrophe for feet. Does that make sense? So when I type it in, I'll type 0, 24, and then a little apostrophe for feet. And when I hit enter, right, I have to zoom out so I can see it, but we can see that I've gone up 24 feet, right, in a straight line. The next thing that I want to do is go to my right 12 feet. So if we're back here on the graph, I want to go over this direction 12 feet. So it's going to be a point out here. Okay? Going that way. So I need my x coordinate first, right? We knew that was going to be 12 feet, right? And then I'm going to go up my 24. So my coordinate would be 12 feet, 24 feet. Make sense? Okay? So if I type in 12 feet, if I can type, 24 feet, I get my next coordinate. Right, so I go across in a straight line. Okay? The coordinates we're typing right now are called absolute coordinates. It means in the overall plane of things, this is where these exist in coordinates. Okay? Sometimes you don't really know where a particular point is going to be, or it's too hard to calculate where that point would be in its absolute coordinate system. Right? So we can instead, good, I'm just making sure I do this. We can instead use something called relative coordinates. Yeah. That's where we're going. That's exactly where we're going. So what relative coordinates do is it says take whatever the previous coordinate was, make that 0, 0, and then tell me where I want to go. Right? So if we switch, these were absolute coordinates. Right? If we switched, I better not write in permanent marker on forward. If we switched over here, right, and we had a point, we had a line that went here, we had a line that went over to here, right? Remember this was 12 feet, 24 feet, right? If we switch and we use relative coordinates, it's going to say now this point right here is now 0, 0. Where do I go? Right? And so in this instance, we're going to go down 6 feet to this point. So in order to use the relative coordinates, instead of typing numbers, we're going to start with the @ sign, like an email address, the @ sign, and then we're going to type the coordinates. So in this case, we're just going down 6 in the y direction. So it would be 0, 6, or excuse me, -6 feet. Okay? Remember, it has to have that @ sign for it to work. So I'll say at 0, -6 feet, and it's going to go down 6 feet from my last coordinate. So we can continue in the same vein with relative coordinates, right? Use the @ sign, and we're going to go over 12 feet now. So it's 12 in the x direction, 12 feet, 0. And we've gone to that direction. Now we would go down we're going to go yeah, so it's at 0, sorry, I'm trying to follow along and make sure that I do it in the same order, right? I would say at 0, -12 feet. Whoops. I missed the at 0, -12 feet. There it is, right? And then I can continue, okay, with the rest of them. Now, before I get all the way through this shape, I do want to show you one other way of doing it, which can be very useful, and that is length and direction instead of using coordinates. Okay. Now, the only problem here, right, is that I have to be careful about my direction. So what I will do is I'll specify length. So I know I want to go 12 feet, so I'll type 12 feet. And when I do that, see how it gives me a black line followed by a white line? Okay. The black line is 12 feet long, right? The white line is saying, where do you want it to go in direction? Now, the problem here is that I want it to be perfectly horizontal, but I don't know where that is. So if I want it to be horizontal, I'd like to turn on what's called ortho, which will snap to basically 90 degrees. And so I can go 12 feet in this direction, and I'll click once that white line is showing in the direction that I want it to go. Now in this case, I want to go down 6 feet, so I'll type 6 feet, enter, and then I'm going to pick that it goes in this direction. Right? And again, I want to go 12 feet in this direction, so I can continue on that way. Okay? So not too hard, but those are 3 different ways of specifying where the lines go. Right? If I were to repeat this, probably the fastest way, right, would be 24 feet in this direction, 12 feet in this direction, 6 feet in this direction, 12 feet in this direction. Right? You get how this is a little bit faster to do it this way. 6 feet. And then I can close the shape. So that's a little bit faster way of doing it, but I like to introduce the concept of these coordinates because sometimes you might want, let's say you wanted to draw something on an angle, right? It's sometimes easier to say, you wanted it to be 12 feet over and 4 feet up, and you didn't know what that angle was, right? Sometimes it's easier to say at 12 feet, 4 feet, and it gives you that angle. Right? So sometimes the coordinates are more useful than the direction, or than the length and direction, but sometimes they're not. So I like to at least introduce you to those. So let me go ahead and delete these shapes, because we don't need those, and we'll come back to focus on this shape. You guys see that the grid is actually rather small in conjunction to how large my object is. I can change the size of the grid, or I can turn the grid off altogether. I usually leave the grid on like this, but I never make it any bigger because I just don't really use it. Okay, but it gives me some sense when we start to shift seaplanes and stuff as to where the origin is. So I just leave it there. Okay. So the next part of the tool set that I'm trying to teach you guys is something called the offset command. And basically what the offset command does is it says, take your object, make a copy of it to one side or to the other side that's a specific distance from the first object, right? So if I had a line, start with just a line, something like that, and I wanted another line to be 6 inches from the first line, I can use the offset command to do it. And I always forget where it is in the menu structure, so bear with me for just a second. Because I always just type offset. It's under curve, offset, offset curve, or you can type offset, right? If we look at the command line, right, it'll say select curve to offset, and it gives us a bunch of options that are in parentheses here. We want to specify the distance, and so you can click on distance, or you can type D for distance, either way, and we're going to specify what that is. This is currently in inches, right, which would be 24 inches would be 2 feet, but you can specify in feet or in inches. It doesn't make any difference. So I know that I want it to be 6 inches, so I'll type 6 followed by the quotation mark, right? And I'll hit enter, and you'll see that my distance changes from, it used to be 24, now it's 6. Okay? It still says select curve to offset, so here's my curve, right? Once I've selected it, it says select side to offset. So do I want it to this side or do I want it to this side? So once again, we're getting the black line that represents the distance, the 6 inches, and we're getting a white line that represents the direction, right? So which side? So if I click on this side of the line, it's going to create a copy of that's 6 inches from the first line. That's what an offset does. All right? So let me go ahead and offset this shape to create the walls. Okay? Now, this is not the kind of class where we're going to get into the technicalities of what's a wall look like construction-wise. Is it really actually 6 inches? No, right? But we're going to do round numbers, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to assume it's 6 inches for right now, and I'm going to do offset. And so in this case, I'll type offset, but you can very easily select it from the menu structure under curve, offset, offset curve. And I've already specified my distance, right? The rest of this is all fine, and I'm going to go ahead and specify that I want it to go to the inside of this shape rather than the outside. So there it is on the inside, and when I click, it makes a second line for my walls, basically. Okay? So now I have 2 sets of parallel lines that are exactly 6 inches apart. Right? Makes it fairly quick to draw this. Okay? The next piece is that I want to create, and this is where you may have to flip it over and start to see the back. This, by the way, on the back is not, you don't have to copy it exactly. If you want to change a few things and you want to make it your own, by all means, I have no problem with that. This is just a general guide so you have something to reference if you need to. I'm going to start with creating a little bit of a door in the center of this wall. And we'll do a standard 3-foot door, nothing particularly fancy. I am again going to use the offset command, but I'm going to do something else first. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll use my Polyline tool. Right? I want to make sure that my object snap is on at the bottom, and I'm going to make sure that midpoint is checked. Right? If you don't have your object snap at the bottom of the page here, you'll have to go up to Tools, Object Snap, and turn on Persistent OSNAP dialog. Okay? And if it isn't on your computer, tell me which computer it is, and I'll try to unlock the computer and change it so that long term it is actually correct. Is yours off? What computer number are you? 07? Anybody else off right now? What number? 03? 06? You were 4? Anybody else? If it's off. Okay, what's the number? 13? 31? 32? 22? Yeah. Number? 08? What's your number? 11? What number? 28? Okay. Okay, I'll try to fix those if I can. If not, do you have one too? 09? Okay. This is the nature of a computer lab. It's not everything gets set the way it's supposed to. I'll try to double check those and make sure. In the meantime, for those of you that didn't have it, make sure you go to Tools, Object Snap, and check the box for persistent OSnap dialog, right? Which will bring up all of your object snaps at the bottom of the page, and you want to make sure midpoint is checked, or mid is checked. Okay, and I know it's really hard for this row to see that, but it is checked. Okay, so now that I have that checked, I'm going to draw a line, and you can see that when I get close to the middle of this line, I get a white dot that shows up right here, and I also get a little bit of text that shows up that says mid, right? It means that I'm going to snap to the middle of this line. Okay, so when I click, it's going to jump right to that middle. Similarly, when I get to this end, right, I'm again getting that little white box. It says, in this case, it says perp and mid. That's because I have perpendicular snap on as well as midpoint, so it's giving me both. And I go ahead and click. Now when I'm done with that, I just want the single line segment, so I'll go ahead and hit enter to be done. Okay? So I end up with a line right here in the center of this wall that represents the very center of the door. Right? That center of the door is not the full door opening. I need both sides of it. So I'm going to do an offset again. So it's either curve, offset, offset, curve, or I can type offset. And I'm going to keep alternating as I go through it. Obviously, typing ends up starting to be a little bit faster when you get used to it. And in this case, I'm going to pick a distance of half the size of the door. So the door was 3 feet. Half of 3 feet is 18 inches. If I did it right, yep. And so I'm going to specify 18 here. And I'll hit enter. And that's 18. I could put the little quotation mark for inches, but my default units are in inches, so I don't actually have to. Okay, and so I can go through and I can click on my object and I can go to one side and create that. I can right click to repeat the last command and then do the other side, and I get both sides. Okay, does that kind of make sense for how I got there? Okay. The other option for this, and this is where as you get more and more proficient in the world of Rhino, you'll start to use these options more, is when I do the offset, the distance is 18, but there's also an option for both sides, right? Which will let me do both sides at once, and I can save myself a step. Okay? So you don't have to, it's optional, but it can improve your speed with doing this. So I have 2 lines here and here, and because this is a doorway, I actually want to cut these 2 larger lines out, right, and remove them. So I'm going to use something called trim to do that. Okay, and this is one of the easiest things to use because it's a great way of kind of clipping off ends of lines. If you've ever worked in AutoCAD, I'm sure you've done trim before. Okay, so trim is under transform, I think. Never mind, it's under edit, trim. There it is. I almost always type trim, right? Select cutting objects first. The cutting objects are here and here. Right? I'll go ahead and press enter. Select an object to trim. It's going to be this line and it's going to be that line.
Can you also do the right click instead of enter like you can in AutoCAD?
Yes, most of the time, yes. Every once in a while it will escape you out instead of finishing the command.
Okay.
But you'll learn along the way. I always right click, and if so the people who wrote Rhino were people who knew AutoCAD very well, and they tried to make as much of it correspond as possible. There's a few quirky things like AutoCAD, to get rid of something, you'd erase it. In Rhino it's delete, so it's erase in AutoCAD, DEL in Rhino. So there's a few things that don't match, but for the most part they match. Okay, so the other option that I have, and I'm going to jump backward for a second and do that again, is when I do the trim and I select these 2 as cutting objects and I hit enter, I can actually just drag a box from the right to the left to get rid of both of them at the same time instead of clicking them. Okay? That also brings in another important thing to recognize in Rhino, and that is how you choose to select objects varies. Okay? So if, for example, right, I select anything from the left to the right when I drag a box, it will select everything that's contained within the object. Right? So for example, if I drag from the left to the right here, it will select those 3 lines. Okay? If instead I drag from the right to the left, it will select everything that is touched by the box, which selects everything. Does that make sense? So there's two different ways of selecting, and it's important to get used to that. So from the left to the right, I select just what's contained completely within the box. From the right to the left, and it doesn't matter top or bottom, it makes no difference. From the right to the left, it's going to select everything that the box touches. Okay, so it's different selections. Okay, so I can go ahead and select this object in the middle, press the delete key, and now I have a nice opening for where that door would be. Okay, I'm going to repeat this process, right, to draw the door that goes out here, right? And repetition is always good in the early stages of drawing. So once again, I'm going to use my polyline, and I'm going to specify from midpoint to there. I'll hit enter. Okay. Now on this wall, the two midpoints are different. So if I wanted it centered on the outside wall, it would be centered on that line. If I wanted it centered on the inside wall, it would be that line. I don't care which one you do. It doesn't really matter. Okay. So I'll go ahead and do it centered on the inside of the wall. There it is. And then I'm going to do my offset again. So let me do offset. My distance is still set at 18. I want it to be both sides. And there it is. I have my two lines. Then I'll go ahead and do my trim. So I'll trim. Now in this case, it's a good opportunity to use my from the left to the right selection, which is going to select just those objects. I'll hit enter. And then I'll drag from the right to the left to select everything that it touches. And I'll get rid of those two pieces. All right. And I'll go ahead and hit escape to be done, and then I can get rid of that last line. Okay. So I have that little opening cut as well. Next piece, I want to draw this into a bedroom. So I'll go ahead and use my Polyline tool, and I have endpoint checked for endpoint snap. And I'm going to draw from this corner to that corner. And then I'll use my offset command again. This time the distance I'll specify as 6 inches. And I'll offset this line that direction, and I end up with this set of lines. If I look at this corner, obviously I want to get rid of that piece. So once again, I'll use trim. And I'll select these two as my cutting objects. And I'll select that. And I'll select that. Okay? And I'll hit enter to be done. And so now I have that. I still do need to draw the door. Okay? And this brings out another thing that works in Rhino that I think is really important that you learn and get used to. And that is something that's called smart tracking. And this is how you can specify kind of a position in space without actually drawing anything. And so what I'm going to draw first is the little door that goes into the bedroom on the back. I want to cut that opening. Right? It's not in the middle of the wall anymore, so I can't use midpoint. But I can assume that it's 3 or 4 inches from this wall, and I want to draw it out in this general region. Okay? So I could draw a polyline from here to here, and then I could use offset for a distance of 4 inches, and then I could offset this out there, and then I could repeat the offset and change the distance to be, 36, and then I could do this again like that. Okay, and I could trim it out and make the door. That's a lot of work. Instead, I can use something called smart tracking, and the button for smart tracking is generally always on, so it's generally running when you work. When I pick the Polyline tool, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over this corner right here, and when I kind of sit on that corner for a second, you see how the corner turns white and I get the little end again? Now, without clicking anything, if I drag off, you see how I get a large perpendicular white line, right? That's tracking. And what I can do is I can specify a distance, and it will go a distance from the point that used to be white that's now turned blue, right there. So I can go a distance from that point. So I can specify now 4 inches, right? And my line will start at that 4-inch position. So it'll go 4 inches from there, and I'll end up with just a single line. Okay? Likewise, if I did a little mental math to reinforce this, I set my point and I drag out to get that white line, right? I would have the other end of the wall being 36 inches plus 4 inches, it would be 40 inches. And then I could specify 40 inches, and then I can draw that line across. So I didn't use the offset command, I used actual measurements to be able to do it. Just another way of doing it. So let me go ahead and use trim on these two. Trim, oops. And I'll drag from right to left through those two objects to create that opening. Okay. So next thing that I want to do is I want to put a window on this wall. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and draw the window, and it specifies where this window should occur. I actually gave you measurements. So it should be 1'6" from this corner here. So once again, I'll use my smart tracking and set a point, there it is, and drag out so that I get my white line, and I'll specify 1'6". And that's where my window is going to start. And I'll right click to enter, and then I'm going to do another 2 feet from this line. So I'll repeat the command here. Here's Polyline. I'll set that point, and it's going to be 2 feet. Right? Sometimes you don't quite get the track. Right? So in that case, there we go. Now I have it. We'll specify 2 feet. There it is. And I'll specify perpendicular. And now I end up with the window mark. Okay? Now I'm also going to draw in a little piece of glass so that I recognize that this is a window. Right? Something like that. Now the level of detail that you're actually putting in here is kind of up to you. Obviously I put a little bit more detail on the page, so you had something to copy should you want to. But it's kind of up to you how much you end up doing. So I have that there. Now it would be really convenient if this window ended up on this side of the wall as well. So I'm going to use a command called mirror to copy from this side and put it over there. And so what I'll do is I'll use my from the left to the right selection to select that little window. And I'm going to zoom out. If I were mirroring, I'm going to need the middle of this door, which I don't have. So I'm going to use the bottom wall over here, which has a middle to it. And I'll use the mirror command, which I think is under transform mirror, right? Or I can type mirror. It's going to say start of mirror plane. Now this is, you could substitute mirror line here. The reason it says plane is obviously Rhino is a 3D program, so it's assuming that you're mirroring across a plane rather than a line. It's kind of the same thing. So I'm going to mirror from the midpoint here, and I'm going to drag a line up, and then click, and it creates a copy of that. Okay? You could take it one step further when you do the mirror, and you could mirror across a corner. So I could go back to transform and mirror. This isn't even on the sheet, I'm just showing it to you. And I could mirror across the corner and create a window that's around the corner. So you can mirror at a 45 in addition to just your straight up and down. Okay? So we've covered that. Mirror. Right? The last thing that can be helpful down the road, especially when you're building 3D objects, is to actually join curves together. And so you can see that I have this curve here selected, but then if I get to this corner, it's a separate curve, and then I have this piece which is separate. If I select these together, if I hold down Shift, I can click on them. There. Right, and we can go around this. And then I can go to join, so it would be transform, and then join, and maybe it's edit, and then join. It's edit, and then join. It will go from being several different objects to being one object. And that can be very helpful when you do extrusions and stuff and make it three-dimensional. So I go ahead and do it here as well. Right? I'll hold down Shift and select that, and then I'll go to edit and join to do that. Okay? So from here, it's a matter of adding more detail. There's more windows, there's doors, there's door swings. I'll show you the door swing, and then I'll turn you loose because it's a curve. So let me go ahead and draw the door. It's a 3-foot door, so I'll do 3 feet, and then it's an exterior door, so it's 1 3/4 inches in thickness. Though I'm not expecting you to know that. You can make it however large you want it to be. And so once again, I'm using smart tracking from that point there. So I have my door. Now I need to do my swing. And so I'm going to use a curve tool to do that, to create an arc. But I don't like the default, so I'm going to click and hold and this gives me a variety of options. This one here, which is the arc start and the end and the direction, is generally the best for this sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and it's going to say start of arc, which would be right here, end of arc would be right there, and the direction, right, would be that way, and it creates a nice arc for us. Just a really quick, easy way of doing an arc. So again, it's hidden underneath the arc tool. It's the third one over. It's the arc start, end, and direction at start. Okay. Of course, you can copy and paste objects the same way you do in AutoCAD. So I did this door. I want to copy and paste it. I can select the door like this. I can go to copy. It says point to copy from. We'll copy from right here. I want it to go right to there, for example. Okay. Now I need to rotate the object, so I'll select the objects and I can go to transform. I think it's under transform, rotate. There it is. We'll rotate from here, right? First reference would be along the door, and I want it to go out that way, and it gives me that door. Okay? So general copy, paste, rotate, that sort of thing as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn you loose to draw. If you run into specific questions or you struggle with specific things, let me know, and I'll try to help you walk through it. One of the challenging parts of early Rhino is that there's so many different ways of doing the same thing for how you create something that there isn't really a right and a wrong answer. And what I try to do in these early handouts is I try to script, here's a certain set of tools that I think are going to be useful down the road. And so I try to divide it up as to, here's some tools that you're probably going to need. And when we get to next class, we'll go through some more tools, and each time we'll kind of build on the last set. Okay? So I try not to overload you with too much, but I try to give you a little bit to kind of get started in what you're doing. If you want to push it more, if you want to draw more, if you want to change this particular building to look different, it's perfectly fine with me. There's no right and wrong to this. Okay? Laura, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm actually blanking on the term right now, but down below where there's the sink, the little curves to the edges,
yes.
you do that as a...
Yes.
Okay.
So it's called a fillet.
Fillet, thank you.
Okay. We have two options. One is a fillet and one is a chamfer. And so if, for example, let's say we had a rectangle, right? And I'm not going to measure it for right now. It has sharp corners on it. If I want the corners to be rounded instead, I can use something called a fillet command, and I think it's under transform. It might be under edit. Might be under curve. I always just type, yeah, there it is, fillet curves. And what this does, it says select first curve, and it also gives us a radius. So you would specify your radius as 1, right? And then you select the first curve there, second curve would be here, and it rounds the corner of that. Okay. Likewise, chamfer, which we will cover both of these down the road a little bit. Chamfer, not chamfer surface, chamfer curve. It's just regular chamfer there. It'll give us two distances, 1 and 1 in this case, and what it'll do is it'll create a straight line corner, right? For those of you that are a little bit more advanced, fillet is a great command when you have lines that you want to come together, right? I would like these two lines to meet in a point. It's hard to make that happen. I can use fillet without a radius, so I set a radius to be 0, and then I can connect those two in a point. It's just a really fast way of creating a point. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it has chamfer too. So just type chamfer, or it's under curve, chamfer curves. There it is. Right. It will also, most of these commands will work for surfaces as well. So if you want to fillet a surface, you can round the surface. If you want to chamfer the surface, you can chamfer the surface. We will cover both of those down the road. Okay. The other thing that Rhino does is if you feel like, and this does involve Laura remembering what the name of the command would be, but if you think, oh, you know, I wanted to chamfer something, if you start to type chamfer, it'll give you all of the options that are similar to chamfer, which is a great way of finding something if you're looking for it. Okay. So I will stop, let you guys work for a while to try to sort through this process. You're welcome to copy this exactly. You're welcome to modify it. It's really up to you. When you're done, right? And so we'll say that I'm done for right now. First thing that I'm going to do is save my Rhino file. And we're going to want to work with this Rhino file down the road again. So I'll go to File and then Save. And the save type should be a Rhino 5 3D model, which is a .3dm file. And I want to make sure that it goes onto my flash drive, into my Dropbox folder. And let me create a new folder. This is 136. And this is A136. Exercises. Too bad I can't spell, right? But whatever. And this would be exercise 203. And I'll go ahead and save that. Okay? So that will save the 3DM file. Okay? But I also need an image to post to prove that I did it today. And so what I'll do is I'll go to File and then Print. And you don't actually print it to like one of the school computers, but under the destination you can actually pick image file. And when you pick image file, right there, it will create a JPEG basically for you that you can post. Okay. There are other options. If I just said print, that would be fine. It would create the JPEG, and I'll choose where to save it. There are, however, other options that you may want to play around with. For example, you can set the default line width from being a hairline to being a little bit thicker, which will help you to see what you're drawing. Okay. The other thing that you can do is you can come to your view and output scale, and you can pick, I want it to be a window, in which case you can specify how large it is on the page. So it looks a little bit larger. You can, of course, also set a scale, right? For right now it's scaled to fit, but down the road you might want it to be in quarter scale or something. You can set that as well here. So once it's done, I'll go ahead and hit print. And I want to save it to my flash drive. And again, inside Dropbox, inside 136, inside the exercises. And we'll call this exercise 203 plan. Right? And I'll click save. And that will then save a JPEG for me to be able to post to prove that I did it. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's actually getting out. If you struggle with that, I'll come around and I'll help you do it. It's because it's just lines, we can't really render it and get anything out of it.
Okay, so when we post, it should be as a JPEG versus an actual Rhino file?
Right. I don't want the Rhino file because I don't want to go through and verify that, oh yeah, you drew it. I don't want to download and open. I just want to be able to see the image. Yeah, you drew it. Works for me. Okay, so let me just finish up, and then I'll come around and I'll help you guys. That should be all you need. If you struggle, let me come down. I'll sit with you, and we'll walk through it. Make sure you get whatever command you need. Okay. So let me go ahead and save this, and I'll stop the recording, and then I'll help you out.